Oye, and welcome back. This lesson is for our QR1 B series. So we're still in satellite orbit design, so we're looking at the orbital mechanics on this, but this video is focused not on the STK side, but some of the recommendations and new abilities that we want to introduce for spreadsheet use. Now, in the A series, you had one satellite and one target, and mostly simple scoring instructions. So basically, you would take either just the total number of minutes, which you could get from a report, and sometimes that was your score, or sometimes it was your total number of minutes divided by 2. But it's a real quick and easy calculation, for the most part, to find your scores. We're going to find here in the B series that we're stepping things up a little bit. We're setting up where, first off, you're going to have multiple targets. In our first scenario, we have 2 satellites and 1 ground target, but in the subsequent ones, you have 1 satellite and several ground targets. But that's something that then makes this a little bit more complex, where it's not just one access report that you'll need to get information from, but several. And we've also got it where you have some more interesting limitations. So in this one in particular, 1B1, Solar Spotlight, we've got ones where you have limits on your inclination, where Pro ISAT must have an inclination that is prograde, so between 0 and 90, and Ready Sat, the retrograde one, needs to have inclinations that are greater than 90, within the appropriate range. I'll let you read over the mission brief so that you know exactly what is and is not allowed. We've also got that you'll be dealing with other limitations, like you do usually have limits on how high you can make an orbit, but now we're going to see that we might be able to adjust that and go a little bit higher than our old limits by lowering our perigee. So there are some new things that we're introducing here in the B series, and the other thing that we wanted to introduce was starting to get a little bit more complex with how you're finding your score. For many of them, you're still trying to maximize or minimize some numbers, but you're going to have to start doing a little bit more math with them. And that is where we're going to pick up. So one of the things that I'm going to do, I've already come over here to my spreadsheet, and I've renamed it ISAT 1B1. I'm going to plan a little bit in advance, and I'm going to make my first column score instead of trial. And then here's the other thing that I'm going to do. I'm going to say pro apo. This is my prograde orbits, apogee, pro para, pro inc, pro argument of perigee, pro ran, and then pro true anomaly. I'm also going to have ret apo, ret para, ret inclination. I'm basically setting up where, since I'm controlling the orbital parameters for several objects, I'm setting up so I can track all of them. Now that is going to send me much farther over to the right in my, ret ran. Sorry about that. And then finally, ret true anomaly. We are going to end up much farther over, and I'm going to zoom out just a little bit. I'm not going to keep it this small. I can do that by holding down Control and hitting either the minus button or the plus button. Plus zooms in, minus zooms out. I think you can also adjust based off of the view and then zoom function here. So that's another thing that you can do. But I'm going to be keeping track of a lot of information here. In this case, I think actually what I'd like to do is also insert something in between the prograde and the retrograde. So I'm going to highlight that column, and I'm going to right-click and say Insert 1 to the left. And I'm going to say Pro Time. I'm also going to go through and make this one, I'm going to draw attention to it, so I'm going to color it green. Over here I'm going to do Ret Time. I'm also going to draw attention to that one and color it also green. We have our normal things where I'm going to be putting those in to track them, but I'm also going to put the actual times involved on these. And we're going to also program the spreadsheet to keep track of some of our info. Now, I mentioned in the other video, and particularly for this scenario, it seems like a good move, we can maximize one satellite without having to consider what the other one is doing. And since this one is built off of a lot of symmetry, maximizing one of them might give us insight into how we could maximize the other. So I'm going to keep my focus almost entirely on Pro ISAT initially. But I am going to put down both of their starting information. So on this, Pro ISAT started at 600, 600, I'm going to Alt-Tab. We have 5 degrees inclination. Argument of perigee is 0. Our RAN is 0. And our true anomaly was 300. The retrograde ISAT, ReadySat, I'll go ahead and bring that one up as well. I'm going to scroll down and put in its information, just so I've got all my info. 600, 600, 175, 0, 0, and I believe this one was 260, 270, 260, 260. Okay, great. I'm going to get things started and put in all the information just so I've got it, but I'm only going to focus on one satellite at a time. Now, I've got tiled the windows that I want to work with. I'm going to start off by looking at the Pro grade satellite. So I've got Pro ISAT. Its orbital parameters here. The 3D view, so I can visualize what I'm doing with my orbit. And the 2D view, so I can kind of see how it projects onto the moon. And then finally, we've got the access log here, which is a key one that we want. Right now, with the default orbit, I've got 7.314 hours. I'm going to go ahead and bring up whatever it is for ReadySat. Right-click, go to Access. I want its access with Tranquil Gardens. Open that one up and scroll down to the bottom. 7.272. 7.272. But I'm actually going to keep that one the same for quite a while because I'm going to focus on just Pro ISAT. But I'm going to do something else here. I'm going to make another column here at the end for total time. And I'm going to teach the spreadsheet a little bit of math. Now, you can do this a couple of ways. We can hit equals to do the math, and you can click on the actual time and hit plus and add that time, and those go together, and here's the sum of 7.314 and 7.272. It's 14.586. But another thing that I'm going to introduce to you is we have a sum function, which is equals sum for sum, and then open parentheses, and you can actually click on these and manually add them. It takes less time to actually type in the plus sign, but if you had a bunch of things that you were adding up, it might be much faster to then say the sum function instead. You can use either, but I wanted to show you and start introducing some of the functions. No pun intended. Okay, the last thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go in and I'm going to do something with the score. Now my score is going to be equal to whatever my total time is from both satellites. Here's where I can take the total time. But I don't get credit for the first 40 hours. So I could click the total time and say minus 40 for 40 hours. Now, the scenario score actually defaults to 0. You can't get a negative score on this, but this would set up that as I go through, I can see any positive value that I get for the score is actually going to be my score. Or you can do the following. I wanted to introduce this in this particular set of videos too, because we're going to use this when we take a look at the second scenario in this series. We can do an if statement. An if statement basically allows you to teach the computer to handle one set of information differently than another. So I can do the following. I'm going to do equals, and then I'm going to call the if function. Now, it's a little complicated when you first start working with these, but it'll give you a cheat sheet here. It says basically if, open parentheses, and it says logical expression. That's basically what do you want it to make a choice based off of. And then once you put that in, it'll say, okay, if the statement is true, if one way, then what it should do, and if it's false, what it should do otherwise. This is often called an else situation. Okay, so the first thing that I want is this. I'm going to say if my value, so I'm going to come over here, my total time is less than 40 hours, then I'm going to hit, so that's my condition, it's going to look at this number and it's going to say, okay, if this number is less than 40, well, if it's less than 40, I want the if function to return a score of 0. This is value if true. If my total time is less than 40, as we see here, I want it to give me a score of 0, so that I actually have the correct score. But then I hit comma, it says, okay, what do you want me to do if that's not true? In other words, if this number, my total time, is greater than 40. Well, in that case, I want it to take this total time minus 40. So that's what I want it to do in both of those circumstances. I hit enter, and it's returning that I have a score of 0, which is great. In fact, I want to draw attention to this score column. It's one of the big things that I'm looking for, and so I'm actually going to color that maybe blue. Now, since I'm not going to be working with the retrograde orbit anytime soon, I'm just going to drag this value down as we introduced in a previous video. And then that way, I know I'm not actually changing the time on that. Now I can do the following. I can zoom in a little bit, and I can start going to change my orbital parameters. I'm going to bring my apogee up to 1,000. And then, I don't know, maybe sync my perigee down to 200, something like that. So I'm actually making two changes, but that's okay. I would want to make some radical changes here, but I'm going to mark them in the way that we've done before. Now, since I have this open, I can hit my refresh button, and I can see I'm now up to 14 hours, 14.061. And when I hit enter, I only taught the score to one cell. Now I can drag this down as far as I want, and it's saying 0 for all of these. Well, let's say that I keep making some changes. I'm not actually going to solve this scenario for you, but I want you to see what I'm doing with it. So I've got some future values in here, and what if I had something that came up to 52.3 hours? Okay, well, let's see. My total time, oh, I forgot to drag down my total time as well. I taught it to add up all of the numbers. So on this, I've got it where the two 7s together came up to about 15 hours. And then with the second one, I had 14 plus 7, that's about 21. And then finally, with unknown settings, but if you keep playing with this, you will get contact times that start getting you actual points. We can see here I have 52.3 plus 7.272, and that gives me a total of 59.572 hours. But I don't get any points for the first 40 of them, so I'd have 59.572 minus 40, which would leave me with 19.572. And that is the score that we see here. Maybe I have some other unknown values, and I could go in, and maybe I have 67.523. And as soon as I fill that in, I can now see my score. Maybe I go over and start changing ReadySat instead. And then I keep ProSat the same, so I'm going to drag these down. But maybe I start changing ReadySat, and I go question, 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 question. And maybe I get, I don't know, 42.178 hours here. We can see by me teaching it this, it automatically adds this up. It took some time at the beginning, but now as I go through and fill these numbers in, I'm instantly getting my score over here. So I'm looking at a score of just below 70. So we're doing a lot more with what we've got. I can zoom back out to see kind of the full thing. I could squeeze some of these columns together if I think that I'm taking up too much space. But one of the things that's nice, I could have put the score way over here, but that means that I'm going to have to constantly scroll over. It can be nice to have it over here where it's easy to see. This is something that we'll build on definitely in our QR2 and QR3 scenarios, where finding your score can actually become very complex. One of the last things that I want to bring up on this is these if statements can be very, very useful. So in the second of the series, I'm going to bring this up, we have relay delayed, where if you have a greater contact time for North America than South America, then you can just take whatever the total time from South America is. So you could imagine that this is the contact time instead of the pro ISAT. Imagine this column is actually going to be our contact time for North America. And you wouldn't have additional orbital parameters because you only have one satellite, but then this column could be your contact time for North America. You could do an if statement that compares those two. If one time is greater than another, do one thing. If it's not greater than another, do another thing. And so that's where I wanted to emphasize this idea of actually having if statements so that you can have the computer, you'll have to program it in, but you can say, hey, if the numbers look like this, do one thing to calculate your score. And if the numbers don't look like that, do this other thing to calculate the score. So play around with that, especially with the second scenario in this series and the third scenario in this series. In the third scenario in the series, you'll actually be pulling contact times from 3 different things. But for some of them, those contact times are going to deduct points, so you might have negative score on that. But with the total time we talked about, you could use a sum function, or you could also do pluses and minus to take contact times that you type in and get it where you can keep track of all of your information and get it to calculate your score. And then at the end, when you've done quite a few of them, you can look for whatever your biggest value is. Those were some of the main things that I wanted to show in these lessons. All right, hopefully that was helpful.